and friendliness and inviting you in to be part of the family. It's my job to moderate, and I promise I'm going to be very moderate in the sense of I'm not going to say very much, because you're here to hear these experts who have got some wonderful things for us to hear. But I will make just a couple of introductory remarks. The first is, as Surab said, I've got two jobs. One is an academic job, and one is a job of advising our government on the evidence base in education. And in both those jobs, there are four big challenges that face education. They're not really so much about innovation and good ideas. They're about the implementation of good ideas. And in particular, I get very concerned about trying to understand the variability in implementation and the scalability of what we might try to implement, and also the sustainability of what we might try to implement. So these are challenges that I think our panelists, in one way or another, will address. I had a minister once who asked me, she said to me, look, Stuart, I'm really sick of hearing about all the problems. What are the 10 things I should be doing? I said, well, give me some time. I'll spend an evening thinking about that. But the point of the little anecdote is, I think we'll talk about solutions here, but solutions in the context of these issues of implementation that I mentioned. So, without further ado, as we say, I'm going to invite, first of all, Jacob to speak. I'll say a little bit about Jacob and his work, and then I will leave it to him. I'll then, later on, after Jacob's finished his first part of this session, I'll move to Dan, and then I'll move to Amit and do the same thing. So as you know, Jacob is a professor of physics and astronomy at Aarhus University, Denmark. And I was just saying to him, I'm so impressed that apart from his day job, which sounds to me pretty difficult enough, he also seems to star in a large galaxy of projects. One is Science at Home, which is creating an online platform that democratizes science. One I'm particularly taken with is one called Karanga. And the reason I'm taken with that is that his group, which is a global alliance for social and emotional learning and life skills to inspire and equip practitioners, policymakers and researchers globally, uses a Maori word, an indigenous word from my country. The word karanga means a sort of a ritualistic welcoming. It's often in the form of a chant or a song. I threatened to sing a song called Karanga Mai, but I'm about to chicken out of doing that. I have, if we've got time, I'll play one at the end from my phone. But karanga is a very beautiful metaphor for the idea of a global alliance that shares matters to do with social and emotional learning. So I will invite Jacob to begin to talk a little bit about these projects. Which ones of them he may wish to talk about, I don't know. But I'm really keen, and I think we're really keen to hear about how he's solved barriers to taking these to scale and implementing them widely.
Thank you very much, Stuart. So I'll talk a little bit about a couple of my projects, and it all started for me being an experimental quantum physicist, and I'm trying to build something called a quantum computer that I will spare you from the details of. But I also had the intention to try to see if we could build software implementation packages that made it much easier for theoreticians and experimentalists in physics to bridge the barrier of sort of understanding each other. And we developed these kinds of simulations, and then at some point we looked at these simulations and we said, it actually looks a little bit like a game. And then we had the idea to say, okay, we have some challenges in my lab and in my experiment, which is to take individual atoms and then move them around so that there's no sloshing. And we transformed that into what is called a citizen science game. And we had a fair amount of success with that, so we had 250,000 people playing this. And one of the sort of really fascinating parts that I discovered in this process is that, I discovered that there is a lot of enthusiasm for participation in public projects where you can generate new knowledge. And that's something, at the end, I'll say a little bit about taking that enthusiasm into the schools, because I think that can really change our motivation for that. And then the other thing that I really found very fascinating in our project was that I thought we had a very complex challenge, and we made this game, and I thought, oh, okay, if we get hundreds of thousands of people, maybe someone will be lucky and find a good solution for us. And it actually turned out that most of the people played the game in a completely different way from our computer algorithms did. So you can say that using our games, rather than searching for and finding the unique human, we were actually now instead discovering the uniqueness of humanity instead. And that has been sort of the kickoff for me to study a broader range of challenges in order to more understand what complex problem solving is, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have at the moment, is really to understand what the difference is between how AI and big data algorithms work and then how we as humans solve these problems. So we're entering, many will say, the age of AI, and I completely disagree. I think that we are not at all entering an age of AI. I think we're entering an age which is really fascinating of hybrid intelligence, because I think that combining the strengths of humans with the strengths of the algorithms, we will discover entirely new forms of working together. But there is one barrier to that, and that is not understanding what AI can do and cannot do, because we already know it, at least if we look behind the headlines and behind the fascination. We know there's lots of things that AI is not good at, neither today nor in the coming years. And social emotional learning is one of the examples of that. But what we don't know at the moment is what we humans are good at. And so that's what I'm using big data to do, sort of joining in our hundreds of thousands of people, not just as volunteers for solving complex challenges for me or other researchers, but embarking in an endeavor to try to understand what human problem solving is. And human problem solving is very complex. And this is where big data is necessary. And that's what we found out. We found out that even having hundreds of thousands of people and looking at that, we still couldn't discover what human problem solving was. We couldn't, because we are all so different, and that's one of the fantastic parts of it. But what we did instead of giving up was, then we said, why not use the same sort of platform of citizen science games to not just study problem solving and having natural science problems, but also having studies, systematic studies on what it means to be human. So that means social science studies that have been conducted in the labs and have really had a big data barrier of understanding us, because many of the experiments that are really fascinating in social science have not been reproducible. And that has been a really big problem for us to understand what it means to be human. So we're trying to do that on a large scale. That is, take social science investigations, how we collaborate and how we build trust, and study that on a large scale, systematically as scientific studies. And then in addition to that, we found that even with those games, we couldn't understand what human problem solving is, because again, we are so different. And that's where our last project sort of entered. And we thought, well, in order to understand human cognition, we really have to look inside of the brains or inside of the cognition of every one of our players. And that's why we developed a new suite of games to do cognitive profiling at scale using games. And this now has a suite of game, allows us to have a suite of game in which we can study humans solving complex problems at the same time knowing also their short-term memory and all of their sort of composition. And that allows us then to start looking at a much more systematic way of understanding what it means to be human. And finally, so that's what we studied for contrasting human and AI. But then in educational settings, I think this is really important, because what I found is that there's lots of people working on game-based learning and trying to make education fun, and I completely disagree with that also. I don't think that education should be fun or should be made fun. I think that education should be made epic. We should be better at finding ways to make it an exciting experience to discover the curriculum that we have put forth. And what we're doing is we're taking our citizen science games, embedding them inside of the curriculum, and then we are inviting, as an introduction to a topic, the students in to participate in these research projects, and then we are making the link to the research challenges that we have. So we're building a bridge between the research challenges that me and other researchers have, and then the core curriculum that you have in 7th grade, and then suddenly you understand, for instance, in physics, why Newton's equations are so important, because in our educational material, you play around with Newton's equation or a pendulum, and then you also get some insight into how we move around individual atoms in a quantum computer. So in that sense, trying to make education epic, I think is one of the big challenges that we have for us. I can talk more about other things, but now, thank you.
I'm hoping Jacob will talk more about that in a minute or two, but it's a wonderful introduction because he covered many of the points that I'm hoping that the two other presenters will cover. But your comment about being better, there's a very famous book on health research called Being Better, and a lot of educational and health research at this minute is now concerned not with what works, but if I could say it this way, which a colleague of mine actually at Stanford uses, it's what works for whom, under what conditions, and at scale. It's not about showing what works in the lab. It's exactly as you said. So thank you for that comment. Right, it's now my delight to introduce Dan. He's been introduced so many times over the last few days that I don't have to really do it again, Dan. But I did think I would say one or two things. I mean, I'm intrigued by the title, Expert with the Council of Europe on the Internet Ombudsman. So you're an expert on the Ombudsman. Right, okay. Obviously an absolutely vital role, but I came across quite an interesting irony when I, surprisingly, when I Googled Dan's background. Google was very forthcoming. Huge amount of hits. You know, I got all these things I could look at, and you know, was what was on top of the list of things I could access on Dan. Well, you won't possibly, but it's a paper, a journal article about Dan, and it's headed "The Paris Lawyer Who Gives Google Nightmares." So clearly Google is not good at filtering out, you know, whatever. I know that Dan is most concerned, and this comes out of what Jacob just said, concerned about the use of big data. You know, Jacob's projects are generating a lot of data, and Dan's concern is about who has access to those data, under what conditions, and what the confidentiality and privacy matters might be. And so he's going to say a little bit about this, but I also gave him a bit of a task. I said a question that's taxing my ministry, given the rapid capability of generating data in schools and archiving those data. The question is, who actually owns it? And the minister asked me, at what point do students own those data? And I don't have an answer for him at the minute. I can try to answer it as a developmental psychologist, but I think Dan's going to traverse legal argument.
Let's start with who owns data. Now, one day it's going to happen to everyone in this room. We're all going to pass away one day. What happens to our data when we are dead? That's a very important, not just philosophical question. It's actually also the beginning of an answer to the legal question. Can we actually transfer data by a will? Can we bequeath our data to our heirs? What happens when we get divorced? Who gets our data? If data has value, it should be part of a divorce settlement, shouldn't it? Well, I'm just waiting for the court case to come. Some data will be more valuable than other, I agree, but it could be pretty important. If data is owned, then it's a commodity. If it's a commodity, then it has a unit of value. If a payment of data in return, with a commodity in return for what we call free services, is therefore not free, what about VAT? If we pay with data as a unit of value, if it is a commodity, why aren't we charged sales tax and VAT? Just think about it. So when we say that who owns data, when we ask that question from a legal point of view, it has all sorts of consequences. Who thought about the tax consequences? This is just one of them. These questions were asked when the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, was drafted. This, as you know, was a very, very important instrument that entered into effect last year on the 25th of May. And the European Union had been working on it for 5 or 6 years. They say that this was the document that was most lobbied in the history of the European Union. 6,000 amendments. And a lot of thought went into the initial question, which is, who owns data, and is data a commodity? The final solution of the European Commission, which was confronted with the practical questions that I just asked, was to say that the data that you have, you can never alienate, which means that you can never dispose of your data. It's part of you. It's almost like creativity. Now, just look at intellectual property law, right? Copyright law. In certain countries, if you have copyright to work that you created artistically, you also have what is called droit moral, which means you have the moral right that even if you license your work of art, the creativity of your mind to someone, then you have a right to object if the movie that's made out of your book doesn't really reflect the intentions of your book, if it makes fun of your book, for instance, if you believe that it contains references that are blasphemy or something like that, which you may feel is the case. You may object to that because it is your work. It is the creative work that you have protected. Even if you license somebody to do a movie on the basis of the book, if it violates your droit moral, your moral rights, you can stop it. You cannot alienate that right. If you have a contract and you relinquish that right, it is null and void. Maybe it's the same with data. You cannot alienate data. The deal that you enter into with the Googles and the likes of them is a deal of trust. It is a fiduciary relationship. And that's the basic philosophy behind the General Data Protection Regulation. You trust someone with something that doesn't belong to you, but is part of you. Now, there are many consequences once you understand that this is the legal construct and the philosophical construct. And one of the consequences is that there is a fiduciary obligation. I think everybody understands what that means, which means that if you are trusted with something, you must take care of that something, right? If you go to have your car repaired, and you know the guy that repairs the car, he has a fiduciary obligation to take care of your car, that nobody steals it, nobody breaks in and so on, while he has it in custody. He has a fiduciary obligation. A bank has a fiduciary obligation to manage your funds and so on and so forth. And if they don't live up to that, they can be sued and they'll have to pay damages. Unfortunately, we don't have that full fiduciary obligation on the side of those that collect, process, and use our data. In my opinion, the logical conclusion of the fiduciary construct is that they should have a fiduciary duty the way they deal with your data. We have not gone there yet. I hope we will go. So the short answer to the question is, who owns data, is you own data. It's part of you. It's a right that you cannot relinquish. It is part of you. To the extent that you trade that data for some quote-unquote free services, you are entrusting it with a third party, and you have the right, in my opinion, for the duty of care, which unfortunately doesn't apply all over the board yet, but you do have 3 or 4 rights that are a matter of law. The first is that you can get back that data whenever you want. That also proves that it's not a commodity, right? You can get it back. So you can rescind the contract that you entered into and say, I no longer trust you with that data. Give it back to me. You can do that. You can also have that data transferred to someone else. So you suddenly decide that I'm not going to work with this company any longer. I'm going to work with this company, the competitor, and you can order this company to transfer your data to that company. You can also have the data rectified if it's wrong, either if it was wrong in the beginning or if the algorithm turned out by some bias or something else to causing it to be wrong, or simply that you regret something that you made, this is the right to be forgotten, and that it became wrong maybe as a consequence of your own acts. Doesn't matter. right to be forgotten, right to rectification, the right to have it deleted, the right to have it transported. All those are consequences of the fact that data is not owned by anybody, it is part of you. So that's kind of like the legal answer to the first question. Maybe I'll take just 2 more minutes on the title of this session, which is barriers to entry. Because that is really a very, very, very deep title. Because when you talk about barriers to entry, actually that is a concept taken from competition law, antitrust law. Barriers to entry in the economic paradigm is something that you talk about when you say that a company holds a dominant position in a market and maybe abuses that dominant position and creates a very high cost for another company to enter into that market. That's called a barrier to entry. That cost may be financial. It may also be that that company that is already in the market has such important monopolistic power that even if you have the money and even if you have better technology, you simply can't get in because they have inundated the market. That is what barrier to entry means if you talk antitrust. And it's of course extremely interesting to combine that notion with the notion of ownership to data. Because today, the biggest barrier to entry for any competition, any budding competition to the big players on the market today is precisely that these big players have all that data. Now, as I just explained, they have it until you decide that they don't have it any longer. And just one quick word on a French legal initiative, which I hope will see the day of light next year, which is actually, Macron has this initiative that all the companies that hold a dominant position should be under a legal obligation to transfer all their data to a competitor at the request of the competitor and not at the request of the user, because as I explained, you already have that right. You already have the right to say to a big company, transfer my data to another one. But his proposal is to say to the little company that starts up, I cannot get into your market. You have created a barrier to entry that makes it impossible, and you're going to destroy innovation, and you're going to destroy disruptive technology because you hold a barrier to entry. I want your data in order to compete with you. I hope that will happen, and that will be another example and confirmation of the fact that only one entity owns data, and that's you in this room. Thank you.
We will get to questions and a little bit more dialogue shortly after these opening remarks. I mean, I want to ask Dan what his ideal state for data protection might look like. So hopefully he will be able to answer that question in a few minutes. Our third speaker, we're very privileged to have Amit Goyal. Did I pronounce that correctly? Yeah. Thank you. Amit is the country head India for edX, a joint venture of MIT and Harvard University that provides online courses. Now, I'm not going to give you all the rest of it because he's going to present about this in many respects. I just want to anticipate, I'm really keen to hear from him ultimately about barriers to the development of these sorts of extraordinary interventions, both within India and across India, because of course one of them was to make computers accessible to schools. So again, I'll invite Amit to make a presentation, and then following that we'll have a Q&A.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Stuart. I hope I'm audible to everyone. Perfect. So we have been talking about some entry barriers. I'm an EdTech guy, worked in EdTech for a little over a decade now. Is someone familiar with the second image or the first image that you see on the screen there? Sorry? You're familiar, right? So when we talk about the first image, that's hole in the wall experiment, right? Right next to it, you see Akash tablet. Do you know what's famous about Akash tablet? A made in India innovation. This was the cheapest tablet PC of the world. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of that team who created a tablet. About 6-7 years ago, Indian government was contemplating how to provide access to high quality education. At that time, and in fact the problem still persists today, they say the more you move, or the farther you move away from a metro city, the quality of education deteriorates. You know, the kind of infrastructure, the kind of high quality education that kids in metro city have, unfortunately, we are not able to bridge the same digital divide in rural area. So what Government of India decided is we need to provide access to high quality education to everyone. And how do we do that? We solve the problem digitally. And we came up with Akash tablet. The whole notion of that tablet was to make sure that every student of India gets something to access. It was dubbed as the cheapest tablet PC of the world. And while Akash tablet could not really see, the kind of success that the government envisaged, however, that actually sowed the seed for reducing the cost of education, the cost of technology. When we launched Akash tablet, a normal tablet PC from Apple or Samsung would have costed about 40,000 rupees. This tablet was launched at about 2,500, 1,500 rupees with government subsidy. Any idea what this image is? How many of you have tried to get admission into IITs? Is there anyone who has gone to Kota ever? Okay. So I used to be a frequent visitor of Kota. This is from one of the temple inside Kota. They say Kota is where the IIT dreams are made. But I believe that's a place where millions of dreams are destroyed every year. This image in the temple, the scribbling on the wall that you see is written by a kid. So in Kota, parents send their kids when they are in class 5th, class 6th, to slog themselves for about 6 to 7 years to prepare for an exam that they have to give after 6 to 7 years to get admissions into IITs. And this is an image from the temple wherein a student has written, "Oh God, help me clear this IIT JEE exam just so I could live up to my parents' admission." Unfortunately, many of the students succumb to this pressure. They study 14 to 16 hours a day just so they could get admissions into IITs. And my question is, while we have utmost respect for IITs, but what is the reason why students want to get admission into IITs, right? It's not because of the love of the education. It's because it gives you certain assurance. It tells you, once you're able to get into IITs or IIMs, you have a fat paycheck which awaits you. You have certain career assurance which awaits you. After all, they resonate the highest quality of education that you can get in India. Unfortunately, I would say about 85, 87% of Indian students, they study at quote-unquote not-so-elite colleges in India. And the problem, while studying at not-so-elite colleges in India, is the lack of jobs. I mean, there have been numerous reports that say 85% of engineering graduates in India are not employable. Any idea what the average salary of a Btech student in India is? Any guesses? About 12,000 rupees. Nowadays, it is less than $200 a month. And even if they're able to get degrees, they're not employable. And today, one of the key challenges that we are facing is not just the unemployability, but there is a whole fear in the society that says by the next 10 years, 50% of the jobs that exist today will not be there. With the emergence of AI and machine learning and robotics, they say robots are going to take our jobs away. But, some have an optimistic view about it. So do I. So I feel that, the work has always changed. Education has always changed. The means have always changed. What we need to do is to continuously evolve ourselves. Now, I'd like to circle back on the key problem that I highlighted in all these three images, which is the desire to get access to high quality education. And that leads me to my introduction now. I'm Amit Goyal. I manage edX, which is a joint venture of Harvard and MIT, two of the world's leading universities. They have set up this non-profit organization to solve these three key problems, to provide access to high quality education to everyone. Today, we partner with 140 of the top-ranking universities of the world. That includes Oxford, Berkeley, Columbia, Harvard. From India, we have IIT Bombay, IIM Bangalore. And whatever you want to study about, be it education, be it technology, be it soft skills, be it law, emerging technologies, anything that comes to your mind, one can go onto this platform, take a course of their choice, absolutely free. So there is no barrier there. We have removed all the barriers of high quality education. We really want to democratize access to high quality education so that kids tomorrow won't be saying, because I did not have the medium, because I did not have the financial capability or assistance or the mettle to get admission into these top universities of the world, that's why I was deprived of high quality education. Not anymore. It's all there at your fingertips, absolutely free. For example, one of the course from Oxford University, what you see on the right-hand side is something that we Indians are crazy about. My favorite is free. So imagine, go onto the platform, take a course of your choice, absolutely free. And if you want to demonstrate your credibility, pay a small amount for it. This is how the certificate looks like. Now, I was speaking to Saurabh yesterday, and we were talking about, why mixing technology with education. Why are we doing it? Why the universities are doing it? What's in there for the university? And this question was asked to me by Stuart as well. So technology, what we have seen in India, and I believe many of you are teachers over here, in the last 10 or 12 years, what I've seen is a lot of teachers, a lot of educators, a lot of policymakers are very apprehensive about adopting technology. I mean, while they would be advocating technology, mixing it into education, but they themselves have a fear within them. I have personally seen a lot of teachers who have come up to me and say, Sir, agar aap ye tablet bachcho ko de doge, to hamara job kya rahega? They fear that machines or tablets are going to replace the teachers. And we feel that if a piece of hardware or if technology or machines are capable to replace a teacher, the teacher deserves to be replaced, right? The machines are not there to replace these teachers. They're here to make their lives easier. Imagine, today you go to any class. What is the average duration of a lecture? 40 minutes, 50 minutes, 60 minutes, right? We have literally put EEG machines on the head of learners and see what their attention span is. After 7 minutes, if you're watching an academic video, your attention span decreases. It all goes down from there. This is one learning innovation that we have derived by having millions of learners on this platform, giving it back to the universities so they could create better videos. Now, what also happens is we are a big fan of rote learning. Teacher would come to the class, they will speak, they would want to explain 100%, students would be able to hear about 70%, and eventually they would be able to retain less than 40%. This is where the active learning comes into picture. This is again where technology comes into picture. The first image that you see, online courses have been there forever. What's new is active learning. So in the first image, do you see the blue strikes out there? Those blue lines are the active stage of your mind when you're watching just a video. The second one is there are more blue lines over there. So when you're watching a video, when you're involved in a discussion, that's when your mind is more active. And the last one reflects the highest active learning stage of mind, which is interpolated testing, which is active learning, wherein you're not just watching a video, you're not just involved into a discussion forum, but you're actually getting hands-on. You're demonstrating what you have learned through assessments. And that gives you the best learning experience. All of these features have been amalgamated into e-learning platform. And that's a core of every course that we offer on the platform. There's a lot for the instructors as well. Today, when a teacher is teaching a class of 40 students, I was a really naughty kid. And I remember if I would be getting bored into any lecture, I would prefer playing pen fight or tic-tac-toe while a lecture was going on. Now a professor who's handling with 40 kids or 60 kids in a class, he has no idea what a backbencher is thinking, right? With this, a professor from any university can teach thousands and millions of learners, and they would be able to see their individual state of mind. At any given point of time in their video, they would be able to see if there are a lot of replays at a particular point, that means they were not able to explain their point properly. If I want to explain you something and my speech is not good enough, maybe I would show you a video. Maybe I would give you an assessment. Maybe I would indulge you in a game. So I would do A/B testing there. all these rich features are made available to the professors so they could get better at teaching, not just students could get better at learning. And having said that, the whole focus of education should be to enhance accessibility. Unfortunately, in our country, we do not have a lot of focus on accessibility. We don't take dyslexia very seriously. It's like, this guy is duffer, isko samajh nahi hai, ye samajhta nahi hai, ye padhta nahi hai, and all of that stuff. We don't take this stuff seriously, but it is a major problem. Our learning, our curriculum, our pedagogy is not really designed to be accessible. On our platform, what we have done is, this is one of the world's most accessible platform, and we have literally removed the whole barriers of learning. Someone who's dyslexic, someone who has any speech impairment, visual impairment, any sort of disability, can still go to edX platform, take a course of their choice using special devices. This image is from Bhargav, one of the students in Ahmedabad, unfortunately fully blind, but had a deep passion for Python. He went to the platform, take an online course, completed it with 93% marks, and today working with one of the leading software firm in Bangalore. These little impacts are something that gives us really proud of. Lastly, the whole purpose of technology is not to create anything proprietary or to create barriers. Whatever we have done, we are passing it on to the world. We have made the entire technology open source. And this is what the role of technology should be. Not to keep things proprietary, but to spread it. That's how you will be able to enhance and evolve. What we have done is, we have spent considerable amount of our own money to create this beautiful platform. And not just the courses are free for everyone, but we have given away the whole technology as a whole. So I see a lot of people are representing universities, some are representing nations here as well. They could use this platform, create their own courses, and create their own version of edX. Create your own digital platform for your university or for your own country. We were speaking to one of the ministers in China, and they were like, wow, this sounds fascinating. You must be charging a fortune for it. And today when I was having lunch, beautiful lady there also asked me, this must be coming up with a huge price tag. And the price tag is 0. You don't have to pay anything. We have made this entire technology open source. So don't pay anything. Create this platform, create your own courses, and leverage the technology as a whole. So that's all. What we are able to do today is, within a short span of time, we are able to reach about 26, 27 million learners. We are able to create 2,000 instances of Open edX, and we are able to change many lives one at a time. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Between the panelists here, you generated a number of questions that I think we might pursue. I just turned to Dan actually halfway through your presentation to say our minutes are up. You know, your data on when the attention span begins to drop. We should probably all leave now, or we should have left about 10 minutes ago. But I think the demonstration is that the data are quite variable because you've got an audience that are very focused on what you had to say. So here's the question, and I don't want to trivialize it because it's not a trivial question. You might get the impression from what Amit said that you don't need teachers, and I'm sure that wasn't the intent, because he talked about the discussion and he talked about the interpolated learning. But I'm going to ask Jacob to comment on the notion of hybrid learning, is it? Or hybrid teaching. And then I'll ask Amit to respond to what you might say.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's fantastic work, and it's a fantastic new opportunity, and this sort of very much illustrates how we have now entered this age of big data, and we can learn things that we haven't been able to learn before. But as I said initially, it's also a big challenge, and now the challenge actually is on all of you to be able to distinguish talks like these and saying that, well, you are left a little bit with the impression, just like with the AI, that the discussion is all over. We know we found all of the solutions. And that's actually not what Amit said, right? But if you listen very closely, what he says is that this is a unique opportunity to learn something. So my main point here is be careful not to have the take-home message that it is all over and that there's no need for teachers, because there's always going to be need for teachers. The jobs are also not disappearing. There's a need for humans also. So 50% of the jobs, I don't think that they are disappearing. They are just being refurbished and changed. So it is a challenge on all of us not to get swept away by these initial advances where we are learning things that we haven't been able to learn before, because we're still left with challenges. Social and emotional learning is still going to be a challenge within these systems. We are still facing huge challenges of how to scale these things up, and we haven't found the solution for that. So we should be really thankful for all of the advances that we're seeing, and at the same time seem skeptic about one-size-fits-all solutions. That's what I'm trying to say, that I think we should all take that skepticism and see what is the solution that is going to fit for me in my classroom, and it's going to be a hybrid solution of being assisted by technology and then using our human capability. So systems like these are really going to be the opportunity to take things off of us that were just big data processing, things like that, and leave us with the interrelations that we have always been good at and that we're always going to be good at.
I completely agree. And just to add further, what we also see is now a lot of universities, schools, they started following the flipped learning or blended learning approach. As I was telling, and just to further on to his particular point, is when I talk about blended learning, teachers would spend a considerable amount of their precious time in teaching basics to the students, in storytelling. Now, if I want to teach, let's say, very basics of artificial intelligence or machine learning to a class of 40 students, I would end up consuming my entire 40 minutes, 45 minutes time in explaining the basics. And teachers and students, I mean, they may have their own learning speed, they may have their own learning requirements, they may not be able to replay me. So what technology is doing is, and how teachers are leveraging at many universities in India, is they're doing a blended learning, wherein students, before coming to the class, they're asked to watch certain videos. When they watch those videos, everyone in the class is fairly knowledgeable, they completely understand what is the basic of machine learning, what is the basic of artificial intelligence, or whatever the teacher tends to explain. And they could do replays as many times as they want. They can have their own learning retention, they can have their own learning speed, they could add subtitles, transcripts and everything. So they could learn at their own pace, at their own convenience, in their own environment. And when they come to the classroom, they have an engaging discussion with the teacher. So they would discuss with the teachers, okay, artificial intelligence is good. How does it translate into what we are trying to learn? How does it translate into our culture, our society, our business and technology needs? And that's where the teacher is able to leverage their experience and give them a better response. So completely agreeing to the point that the whole purpose of all these educational resources, be it technology, be it online courses, is to make a teacher's life better, is to make them more efficient. And this is how teachers and the students should see this, as supplementary resources, which just helps them becoming better.
Thank you. I now want to ask Dan this really difficult question, but before I leave this conversation between the two presenters, I want to ask just very briefly, is there something important in the distinction between hybrid and blended here? Jacob uses the term hybrid and Amit uses the term blended, and I'm just curious if there's a distinction between those two things, or if these are synonyms for the same phenomena.
So when I talk about hybrid intelligence as a more general concept, then I think of us understanding much more about the human role in interactions, and then understanding how technology is there. Whereas blended technology and blended education is more about taking technological solutions that are there and then applying them to those situations. So I just want to really say that I think that one of the really important things about applying educational technology is to be extremely aware of the problem that we're trying to solve. And one problem that we're trying to solve here is, as Amit said, the information content that you have already, right? But that leaves all the other challenges. It leaves the challenge of social and emotional learning, the interactions and everything. So when we talk about educational technology, we really have to focus on what the remaining problems are inside of the schools and how we can build technology to address those, rather than just saying that we apply technological solutions all the way down and then they think that that's a one-size-fits-all fix.
Thanks. Sorry, I wasn't wanting to put you on the spot. I was curious about the distinction. You agree with that? Have anything more to add?
I think yes, really.
Oh, sorry.
I thought it's going to come up on you. Right. So yeah, I completely agree with that particular point. And just to add a little further, nothing to contradict, but what we also need in our education system today is to get real hands-on. The way education, the courses and everything works in Indian society is still very theoretical. It's still very rote learning. Today, when we give our exams, we have to write everything on a piece of paper. We get our results after 2 or 3 months. And after 2 or 3 months, I would get to know I scored 70%. That's a labeling which is done on a learner. Learner never gets to know what was the right answer to the places where he lost the marks. They never get hands-on. And this is where, blended learning and I would say hybrid learning also comes into picture. Is using technology, you could also get hands-on. You could instantly see where you stand. You can apply your learning instantly. And that's why with most of the e-learning courses, if to have to make them better, is to integrate labs. So with most of the courses that you see on this platform, labs are integrated wherein you could get your hands-on experience right away.
Thank you. Right, here comes the question, Dan.
Fiduciary.
Fiduciary. Right, I'll take responsibility for this question. So the question is, as my minister put it to me, we might be sick of hearing about the problems. What are the solutions? You think that the GDPR is in the right direction? What President Macron hopefully does next year is in the right direction? What else is there to do?
I think that the real problem in terms of data protection and the GDPR and the rest of it is that unfortunately, the question is not who owns the data, but we have become our data. Just think about that. We have become this binary thing which is data. We are the sum of data. Our whole life is determined by our data. We have become our data. Our reputation is our data. Our medical history is our data. Our school curriculum is our data. We have been reduced, and stress the word, reduced to our data. Now, the worst thing that could happen to me in terms of music was when you started applying mathematics to music. That's terrorism. That's completely destroying music. And this is happening. And this is what's happening to us in this room right now. There is much, much, much more to being human than being the sum of our data. And unfortunately, the trend is that if you cannot reduce something in this universe to a binary equation, then it doesn't exist. That's completely wrong. And this is the real challenge we have. The real challenge is to say that there is much, much more to humanity than artificial intelligence and data. Now, education is important in protecting that. So when I look at data privacy, it's not just a question of surveillance. One of the reasons, by the way, that the GDPR came into effect rather early, believe it or not, even after 5 years, was Snowden. You remember Snowden, the NSA revelations that the NSA was, looking into what Angela Merkel was ordering for pizza. That was actually a fact, and that really triggered a surveillance fear in Europe and with many of the allies, and that really also kicked through the whole GDPR venture, I would say, protecting our data against surveillance. But surveillance is one thing. I think that one of the most scary thought experiments that we ever have is Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. And you probably know that. This prison where the prison warden is looking at you all the time. You don't have 1 second of your life where somebody's not looking at you. And I'm afraid that we are being reduced to living in that prison. Not in terms of government surveillance, but everybody knowing everything we do. Privacy is an extremely elusive philosophical and legal concept. But we know it. We know it. We know what it means. Now, the first article that came out on privacy in the US actually came out in the Harvard Law Review in 1898. was written by Warren Brandeis, and Brandeis was, of course, a Supreme Court judge. And he defined privacy as the right to be let alone. The reason that he did that was that in his family he had the then paparazzis chasing his family, and he wanted to be let alone. Privacy is much, much more than the right to be let alone, because the right to be let alone is a negative right. Privacy is a positive right. Privacy is the right to affirm yourself as a human being and not being afraid of everybody watching you all the time, because the effect of that is that you will never create your human potential. You will always be afraid of committing mistakes. One of my favorite authors, Oscar Wilde, The Portrait of Dorian Gray, my favorite aphorism: the only things you never regret are your mistakes. Right? When it's too late, what do you remember? You remember what you shouldn't have done. You remember what's politically incorrect. That is life. And we are afraid of making those mistakes because somebody's going to pick it up on Facebook and it's going to destroy the rest of your career on Earth. This is against the human condition. And that is why we have privacy. It's not a negative right to be let alone. It's a positive, absolutely necessary condition to realize our full human potential. Now, please, when we look at data privacy and we see the criticism that sometimes you guys who collect artificial intelligence, not you because you're a good guy. You're a good guy, okay? You wear the white hat. But not all of you guys wear the white hat. And the problem is also that who knows who's going to be in your position in 10 years, right? So what happens to the data today that we trust in a fiduciary relationship with good guys, we don't know what happens when there is a regime change or something happens on the stock market and some company that promises to take good care of your data will have no longer to do it because they have some financial problem. Who knows, right? Stuff like that happens. Is anybody in this room going to say that that will not happen? Of course not. So we need to be very, very, very careful to understand that this is much, much, much more than fighting on technical discussions as to who owns data and what kind of data can be collected and can you have it deleted and that kind of thing. It is really protecting the human condition, allowing us all to realize ourselves as humans. And that is why we have data protection. And that is why we need to trust the people that we entrust our data with, so that we don't become binary creatures that are afraid of doing anything that's politically incorrect and become precisely the citizens that any dictator in history would dream of having. Going back to education, according to the Prussian model, which was creating gun fodder, which was creating good citizens that would die for the country. That's the kind of thing that we left 200 years ago in our education system, and I wouldn't want to see that re-enter through the back door. Thank you.
You hold on to. Well, that was a very passionate exposition of the right to be private. I hadn't heard it put like that before, Dan, so thank you. And thank you also. I've learned a new, this is a serious point, I've learned a new sense of sustainability, just to put it in your terms, the sustainability of the good people, or the good devices, or the good designs for what we do. And that's a serious question, you know. Governments change, as you say. Technology changes, as you say.
Can I just comment quickly on the discussion of good guys and bad guys, and also sort of the Macron proposal that is. So one of the really big, as Dan also said, one of the really big barriers of entry is that we have big tech companies really owning a lot of data on us, and what they use that for is, of course, also what Amit can do is you can utilize the power of big data in order to learn something, right? And in our project, we have had the privilege of having some people call us the good guys, but we've also had some people who say that our project is even more dangerous than Google and should be shut down right away. And the reason they say that it should be shut down is that we're not trying to do what Google is doing at the moment, take big data of behavior and predict future behavior. What we are actually trying to do is that we're trying to take behavior and build models of psychology, to build a better understanding of human human mankind, and so how our psychology means. And that means that if you do that, you can actually be predictive. You can actually start to transfer that from one region to another region. And I think that, of course, can sound very scary because we can start to build artificial intelligence in that way, but it also is a unique opportunity for us to understand much more about what it means to be human. And what I wanted to say with that is that if you have those kinds of insights, that is an alternative to the Macron proposal there, because if you have those insights about what human behavior is, then you can start to detect also what it is that Facebook and Amazon, how we are being subtly manipulated using our data and predicting our behavior. And so the big sort of equalizer is, can we create a system in which small tech companies can actually provide a service which is equal in capabilities? And I think that's really the challenge that we're trying to solve, is how can we build something where we have not a monopoly? And I think that goes through that understanding of what it means to be human.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, and I haven't been very moderate. Maybe I've been immoderate because I haven't managed to leave enough time for a number of questions from you, but we've probably got enough time for one question, and then I should reiterate what Saurabh said, that there is, of course, the later session where you can ask questions of each of the panelists here. But is there one burning question that somebody has? There's somebody very quickly put their hand up at the back. You got it? Go. Go. Just so. Having the remote control. Yeah, no, use that.
Apun. This question is for Amit. So, Amit, glad that we have this edutech, to learn things over technology. So, how do you solve this distraction problem? Because when we log into internet, we have multiple tabs running simultaneously. So, if any ping from social networking platform, or else any YouTube, some interesting movie. So how do we tackle that one to improve the percentage of completion of the courses?
Sure. So I can't really give you a lot of gyan on how to, concentrate your focus and really focus on deriving the best what you should be doing. For example, if you're looking at something informative online, or not just informative, but let's say it appeals you in any manner, you won't really switch your tabs, right? Similarly, we have tried to create our courses in a manner that it holds on to your attention. And if we feel that, if we are offering a course or if you're learning anything, wherein the piece of learning is not able to hold your attention, it's not worthwhile spending your time there. Secondly, learners should be motivated, learners should be incentivized for whatever they are learning. And how we are doing it is one of the stigma with online courses, and what I've seen, and I've personally done that in my previous avatars, is when I was working in companies and my L&D leader would tell me, this is a course on XYZ stuff, you should be doing it. Like, heck, I have other stuff to do. Why should I take learning down my throat if it doesn't interest me? And I would pass on to it. Now what we have started doing is really incentivize the user. If you really want the user to consume your service, give them some tangible outcomes. If I talk about online learning, the tangible outcomes that we are giving to a learner is what you learn online. You go to a university will give you credits. What you're learning online, you go to an employer, and there are companies like GE and Tech Mahindra. They say, hey, if you have completed this course from edX, you get a guaranteed interview. So I think the whole onus really lies on the service provider and the recipient. There has to be a good friction between both of them. That's it.
Only one more. Good afternoon, sir. I believe Amit differs from the remaining two panelists because privacy is an issue that actually you are not following it because you're breaking the barriers and actually you wanted to bring that to all the people so that learning becomes easier for all. That is one thing. And one more thing is, I just want to know whether blended learning, hybrid learning are different. Because what I believe is, Jacob is telling, That is, actually it is about intelligence, hybrid intelligence, and you are telling about learning, blended learning. Both are different, I believe. So blended learning is a teaching through the teacher and also through the ICT, digital learning. It is blended learning. And what he said was, it is intelligence about, hybrid intelligence. That is a different aspect. I believe that. And thank you very much for the thing. I want to make it clear. Because I did not get the answer for that actually. In the beginning, hybrid intelligence and blended learning.
So
because you both were...
Got it. So I think we're running out of time. I think your assumption is absolutely correct. Hybrid learning and blended learning are correlated. Blended learning is actually a part of hybrid learning. One leads to another. Coming back to your first question, while we provide access to courses and everything, we don't monetize the data at all. If you go to Facebook or Google, they know your behavior, and then you are a commodity that all these companies are trying to monetize. On the other hand, on our platform, if you're taking any course, there would be no distraction, there would be no prompting to buy anything. We don't sell your data. Heck, we don't even do any advertisement at all. So it's pure learning only. And we are able to do that by virtue of being a non-profit.
So quickly, just say the way that you tell the difference between Dan's good guys and bad guys is he shows all of the insights so that they are shareable. So what he's saying, he's using the data in order to find out how the optimal structure of a classroom setting should be, and everyone can apply that. And you can contrast that with keeping the data secretive and using that for business profit. I think that's the distinction.
Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you. Can we thank our presenters, please?
Why would you do that to me?
It's okay. We had you in person, so that doesn't matter. Thank you so much. Please, a huge round of applause for them, because they're all stalwarts from where they come from, and it was an extremely. So if you could, we are done, yes. In the politest possible way. So we have another scintillating session just right now. Again, about an extremely important topic which governs our education ecosystem. I want to invite